In 2023, Grok AI, a cutting-edge artificial intelligence system, embarked on a groundbreaking project to analyze artifacts recovered from the RMS Titanic. As the world commemorates the tragic sinking of the Titanic more than a century ago, new insights have emerged from the depths of the ocean, revealing secrets that challenge our understanding of the ship's final moments, the lives of its passengers, and the conditions of the wreck itself. What Grok AI discovered about these artifacts shocked historians, maritime archaeologists, and the public alike, providing a fresh perspective on one of history's most infamous maritime disasters, and forcing us to reconsider what we thought we knew about that terrible night in April 1912. The RMS Titanic has captivated the public imagination since it sank on April 15, 1912, after striking an iceberg during its maiden voyage across the Atlantic Ocean. Few events in modern history have remained so persistently present in collective memory for so long. The disaster did not simply fade into the past as other tragedies have. Instead, it embedded itself into culture, resurfacing generation after generation through retellings, reinterpretations, and renewed investigations. Part of this enduring fascination lies in the scale of the tragedy itself. More than 1,500 people lost their lives in a single night. Entire families disappeared. Futures ended before they had fully begun. But the numbers alone do not explain why Titanic remains so powerful. There were other disasters with comparable or even greater loss of life. What made Titanic different was the story surrounding it. The Titanic represented the height of early 20th century ambition. It was not just a ship, it was a statement. Built during a time of rapid industrial expansion, it embodied the belief that technology had reached a level of mastery over nature. It was the largest passenger ship ever constructed at the time. Its design incorporated advanced safety features, including watertight compartments that were believed to make it nearly unsinkable. This belief, whether exaggerated or not, became central to the narrative. Titanic was seen as a triumph of engineering, a symbol of progress, and a demonstration that human innovation could overcome the unpredictability of the natural world. That belief made the disaster even more shocking. The collapse of such confidence transformed the sinking into something more than an accident. It became a warning. For over a century, the story has been told in broadly similar terms. Titanic struck an iceberg. The damage compromised multiple compartments. Water flooded the ship. There were not enough lifeboats. Evacuation was incomplete and uneven. The ship broke apart and sank. Survivors carried the story forward, and official inquiries attempted to reconstruct what happened. And for many years, that seemed sufficient. But the discovery of the wreck in 1985 changed everything. When the remains of Titanic were located nearly 3,800 meters below the surface of the North Atlantic, the disaster shifted from something remembered through testimony into something that could be physically examined. The ocean floor preserved evidence that no survivor had fully seen. It revealed the ship not as a single intact object, but as a fragmented structure surrounded by a vast field of debris. That debris field became one of the most important sources of information about the disaster. Scattered across the seabed were thousands of objects. Some were structural, pieces of the hull, fragments of machinery, sections of railing. Others were deeply personal: shoes, jewelry, watches, dishes, clothing, and everyday items carried by passengers and crew. Each object had a story, even if that story was incomplete. Over time, researchers cataloged and analyzed these artifacts. They studied corrosion, material composition, and manufacturing techniques. They mapped where items were found. They attempted to match personal belongings to individuals on the ship. These efforts produced valuable insights, but they were limited by scale. The amount of available data grew far beyond what any single researcher or even any single team could process comprehensively. This is where the introduction of artificial intelligence marked a turning point. In 2023, Grok AI was applied to the Titanic dataset in a way that had not been attempted before. Instead of focusing on individual artifacts or isolated categories of evidence, the system was designed to integrate everything. Images, recovery coordinates, material analyses, conservation records, passenger data, ship blueprints, and historical accounts were all processed together. The objective was not simply to identify objects more efficiently, it was to uncover relationships between them, patterns that had previously gone unnoticed, connections that could not be seen when data remained separated. The results were not a single dramatic revelation, but something more significant, a reconstruction of the disaster that was more detailed, more interconnected, and in some ways more unsettling than the traditional narrative. One of the first areas where this became clear was in the analysis of materials. For decades, researchers had debated whether the Titanic's construction played a role in its sinking beyond the impact with the iceberg. Some studies suggested that the steel used in the hull might have been brittle in cold temperatures. Others focused on the quality of rivets or the design of compartments. Grok AI approached this question differently by comparing corrosion patterns across a wide range of recovered metal objects and structural fragments. The system identified variations in how different materials had aged and degraded over time. These variations pointed to differences in composition and manufacturing that were not immediately obvious. Some components appeared to have been made from higher quality materials that resisted degradation more effectively. Others showed signs of faster deterioration, suggesting differences in processing or composition. This did not mean that Titanic was poorly built overall. In many respects, it represented the best engineering of its time, but it did suggest that the ship was not entirely uniform in its material strength. And that matters, because when Titanic struck the iceberg, it did not experience a single catastrophic rupture. Instead, the damage appears to have been distributed along multiple sections of the hull. If those sections responded differently to stress due to variations in material properties, the overall damage could have been more complex than previously understood. The AI analysis reinforced the idea that the disaster was not caused by a single failure, but by a combination of factors interacting under extreme conditions: impact angle, material behavior, temperature, structural design, human response. Each played a role, and each contributed to the outcome. Another key discovery came from the spatial analysis of artifacts across the wreck site. By mapping where objects were found and analyzing their distribution, Grok AI was able to reconstruct aspects of the ship's breakup and descent in greater detail. The debris field is not random. Objects are distributed in patterns that reflect how the ship fell, where it broke, how sections separated, and how materials were carried by currents as they fell. Certain clusters of heavy structural components suggest areas where the ship experienced intense internal stress before breaking apart. Lighter objects, such as personal belongings and furnishings, were scattered more widely, indicating that they were released during later stages of the collapse or carried further by underwater currents. This spatial mapping provided new insights into the sequence of events during the sinking. It suggested that the breakup of the ship was not a clean, instantaneous event. It was progressive. Structural failure built over time. Stress accumulated, components weakened, and eventually the ship could no longer hold together. If the structural analysis revealed how the ship failed, the personal artifacts revealed something far more human. Among the thousands of objects recovered from the wreck, the most powerful are not the large pieces of steel or machinery. It is the smaller items that carry the greatest weight. A single shoe resting alone on the seabed, a pocket watch, a ring, a pair of glasses, objects that were never meant to last yet somehow endured. Each of these items once belonged to someone who boarded the ship expecting to arrive safely across the Atlantic, someone who packed carefully, thinking about comfort, routine, and the journey ahead. And then, in a matter of hours, everything ended. For decades, these objects were studied individually. They were cataloged, preserved, and displayed. Researchers examined them as isolated pieces of evidence. But when Grok AI analyzed them collectively, something changed. Instead of viewing each artifact on its own, the system examined relationships between them, and more importantly, attempted to reconnect them with the individuals who once owned them. By combining engraved initials, historical records, passenger manifests, and the precise locations where items were recovered, the AI was able to establish probable ownership for certain artifacts with a higher level of confidence than previously possible. A gold pocket watch could be matched to a businessman traveling from New York. A piece of jewelry could be associated with a first-class passenger whose name appears clearly in historical records. A worn shoe might be linked to a third-class traveler, someone whose identity was barely recorded beyond a line in a manifest. These connections transformed the meaning of the wreck. The debris field was no longer a collection of anonymous objects. It became a map of interrupted lives. A watch suggested someone checking the time, perhaps during the evacuation. A suitcase reflected preparation for a long journey, packed with intention and expectation. A child's toy suggested something far more difficult to confront, the presence of children caught in a situation they could not understand. When these items are viewed together, they shift the narrative. The Titanic is no longer just an engineering failure. It becomes a moment where ordinary lives were abruptly cut short. At the same time, the artifacts reveal something less emotional but equally important. They preserve evidence of class. The Titanic was structured around a strict social hierarchy. Passengers were divided into first class, second class, and third class. These divisions shaped every aspect of life on board: living conditions, dining arrangements, movement throughout the ship, and access to services. When the disaster occurred, those divisions did not disappear. Instead, they became more significant. Grok AI analyzed passenger data, survival records, and artifact distribution to examine how class influenced survival. The results confirmed patterns long recognized by historians, but clarified the underlying causes. First-class passengers had the highest survival rates. Second-class passengers had lower rates. Third-class passengers had the lowest. But the explanation was not simply chance, it was structural. First-class passengers were located closer to the lifeboats. They had more direct access to the upper decks. They were more likely to receive assistance from crew members who were stationed nearby and trained to prioritize certain areas of the ship. Third-class passengers faced a different reality. They were located deeper within the ship. The routes to the lifeboats were longer, more complex, and often unfamiliar. Many did not speak English fluently, which created additional confusion during an already chaotic situation. Some encountered physical barriers or delays that slowed their movement toward the upper decks. These factors combined to create a system in which survival was not evenly distributed. No single decision needed to be made to produce this outcome. The design of the ship and the organization of its passengers were enough to determine how events unfolded. Access, more than anything else, determined survival. The issue of lifeboats further reinforced this pattern. It is widely known that Titanic did not carry enough lifeboats for everyone on board. However, Grok AI's analysis revealed another critical detail. Many lifeboats were not filled to capacity when they were launched. Seats were left empty. In the early stages of the evacuation, many passengers did not fully understand the severity of the situation. Some hesitated to leave the ship. Others were uncertain about the safety of the lifeboats themselves. Crew members, lacking complete information, were cautious about overloading the boats. As a result, valuable opportunities to evacuate more people were lost. By the time the seriousness of the situation became clear, the remaining lifeboats were launched under far more urgent conditions, with less time for organization and control. The difference between these early and late evacuations was significant. The first lifeboats left with available space. Later boats were filled under pressure, often in a state of confusion. Timing in this case was critical. Grok AI also examined behavioral patterns during the evacuation, using survivor testimony and historical records. The analysis revealed a wide range of human responses. Some individuals remained calm and helped others. Crew members carried out their duties under extreme pressure. Certain passengers gave up their places to allow others to escape. At the same time, there were instances of hesitation, confusion, and panic. Some people struggled to understand what was happening. Others made decisions based on incomplete or incorrect information. For many, there was simply no opportunity to act at all. The disaster was not experienced in a single, uniform way. It unfolded differently for each person on board, shaped by their location, their awareness, and the time available to them. Taken together, these findings reveal something deeper about the nature of the event. The Titanic was not just a ship that sank. It was a system built around hierarchy, structure, and access. And when that system was placed under extreme stress, its underlying inequalities became impossible to ignore. The analysis of artifacts and data does more than reconstruct events. It reveals how society functions in moments of crisis. And in the case of the Titanic, it shows that the divisions present in ordinary life did not disappear when disaster struck. They intensified by the time the analysis reached its final stage. So the focus shifted from structure and society to the final moments of the ship itself. For more than a century, the sequence of Titanic's sinking has been reconstructed through survivor testimony, physical evidence, and engineering models. But those reconstructions have always contained uncertainty. Darkness, panic, and distance made eyewitness accounts inconsistent. Even those who survived could not fully see what was happening across the entire ship. The wreck provided answers, but not complete ones. Grok AI approached the problem by combining structural data, debris field distribution, and engineering simulations into a single model. Instead of relying on one type of evidence, it layered multiple sources together to reconstruct the final sequence of events. What emerged was a picture of the sinking that was more complex, and in some ways more violent than commonly imagined. After the iceberg struck, damage was not confined to a single section of the hull. Instead, multiple compartments were open to the sea. Water began entering the ship gradually but steadily. At first, the situation did not appear catastrophic. The ship remained stable, and there was no immediate sense of collapse. But beneath the surface, the process had already begun. As water flooded the forward compartments, the bow of the ship started to sink lower into the water. This created increasing stress along the length of the hull. Titanic had been designed to withstand many types of strain, but not the specific conditions it now faced. A slow, uneven filling that shifted the balance of the entire structure. The longer the flooding continued, the greater the stress became. As the bow descended, the stern began to rise. This placed enormous pressure on the ship's internal framework. Decks, bulkheads, and structural supports were forced to carry loads they had never been designed to bear. According to the AI model, this process was not smooth or controlled. It was chaotic. Internal failures likely began before the visible breakup. Floors may have buckled, walls may have collapsed, machinery may have shifted under its own weight. Spaces that had once been orderly would have become unstable and dangerous. This changes the way the final moments are understood. Instead of a ship that remains structurally intact until a sudden break, Titanic may have already been failing internally before the visible separation occurred. When the breakup finally happened, it was not a clean snap. It was the result of accumulated stress reaching a breaking point. The hull could no longer support itself. Structural integrity failed. The ship split into two major sections, the bow and the stern. The bow, heavily flooded, continued its descent. The stern, briefly supported by trapped air and remaining buoyancy, remained afloat for a short period, but without the rest of the ship to stabilize it, it too began to fail. The AI's analysis of debris patterns suggests that the stern did not simply sink intact. It underwent significant structural collapse during its descent. As it fell, it twisted, broke apart further, and scattered material across the seabed. This explains why the stern section of the wreck appears far more damaged and chaotic than the bow. The bow remains relatively recognizable, the stern does not. The difference reflects how each section experienced the sinking. The bow descended in a more controlled manner, though still under extreme conditions. The stern, by contrast, appears to have experienced a far more violent collapse. At the same time, objects within the ship were being displaced. As structures failed, contents were released. Furniture, personal belongings, and smaller components were swept out into the water. Some were carried away immediately. Others were released later as different sections of the ship opened or disintegrated. The debris field became a record of this process. Objects closer to the main wreck indicate areas of structural failure. Objects found farther away reflect movement through water currents and the timing of their release. By analyzing these patterns, Grok AI was able to refine the timeline of the sinking. It was not a single moment of destruction. It was a sequence, a progression, each stage building on the last. While the structural reconstruction provides a clear understanding of how the ship sank, it also leads to a more difficult question. What happened to the people on board during those final moments? Historical records provide partial answers. Survivors describe confusion, urgency, and fear. They describe the deck tilting, the sound of metal under strain, and the sudden shift when the ship broke apart. But many details remain uncertain. Grok AI examined available data on recovered bodies, clothing records, and environmental conditions to better understand the fate of those who did not survive. The conclusion was stark. For most victims, the primary cause of death was not drowning. It was cold. The water temperature in the North Atlantic that night was close to freezing. In such conditions, the human body cannot maintain its core temperature for long. Cold shock occurs almost immediately upon immersion. Breathing becomes uncontrollable. Muscle function deteriorates rapidly. Within minutes, the body begins to fail. Even strong swimmers would not have been able to survive for long. This means that for the majority of those who entered the water, survival time was measured in minutes, not hours. The cries described by survivors, the sounds that filled the night after the ship disappeared, would have faded quickly. This reality changes the emotional understanding of the disaster. It was not a prolonged struggle for survival in the water. It was a rapid and overwhelming loss of life. The lack of sufficient lifeboats becomes even more significant in this context. Without a place in a lifeboat, there was almost no chance of survival. Grok AI also revisited the response of nearby ships, particularly the SS Californian. For years, the Californian has been a subject of controversy. It was closer to Titanic than the Carpathia, the ship that ultimately rescued survivors. Yet it did not arrive in time to assist during the sinking. The AI analyzed communication logs, testimony, and operational procedures to better understand this failure. The findings suggest that the issue was not a single point of negligence, but a combination of factors. Wireless communication protocols were limited. Messages were not always interpreted correctly. The crew members may not have fully understood the signals they received. Decision-making was influenced by incomplete information. As a result, a ship that might have been able to assist more quickly did not respond in time. This highlights another aspect of the disaster. It was not only the events on Titanic that determined the outcome, it was also the system surrounding it. Communication, procedure, interpretation, all played a role. The final area of analysis focused on the condition of the wreck itself over time. By comparing images taken during different expeditions, Grok AI tracked how the wreck has changed since its discovery. The results show that the ship is deteriorating at an accelerating rate. Metal structures are weakening, sections are collapsing, organic materials have largely disappeared. Microbial activity is consuming the steel. Over time, the wreck is being reduced to fragments. This raises important questions about preservation. How much of the Titanic will remain in the future? How much of the physical evidence will be lost? And what responsibility exists to document or preserve what remains? The analysis suggests that within decades, significant portions of the wreck may no longer be recognizable. The site is not static, it is changing, and eventually it will be gone. This adds urgency to ongoing research. Each study, each image, each recovered artifact contributes to a record that may not be possible to recreate later. In the end, the findings from Grok AI do not overturn the story of Titanic entirely. The ship struck an iceberg. It sank. Lives were lost. Those facts remain unchanged. But what the analysis does reveal is that the story is more detailed, more complex, and more interconnected than previously understood. It was not a single failure. It was a convergence of many. Material limitations, design assumptions, environmental conditions, human decisions, social structure, communication systems, all combined in a way that produced a catastrophic outcome. The Titanic remains powerful, not only because of what happened, but because of what it reveals. It shows how systems behave under pressure, how inequality affects survival, how technology can fail, and how human decisions, even small ones, can shape the course of events in ways that are not immediately visible. More than a century later, the wreck still provides answers, but it also raises new questions, not only about the past, but about the present, and about the systems we continue to build today.